Yeah, so my name's Erin Mustin First. I'm an occupational therapist. I currently practice at Craig Hospital, which is a rehab facility for spinal cord injury and brain injury. My specific practice setting is assistive technology.
Awesome. So, how did you get started using gaming as an intervention?
Yeah, so prior to working at Craig, I was just working in general rehab at the University of Michigan. And when I first entered practice was probably when this dates me, when the Nintendo Wii came out and was like a hit for therapists, and so that was probably my first exposure, and it was cool, but it certainly had limitations. But more significantly, I worked with a couple of really great mentors at U of M who were using technology, mostly computer gaming, kind of creatively to address patient goals. And so I had that exposure prior to coming to Craig, and then just kind of leapfrogged from there to start a gaming program at Craig.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
had a follow-up question too when you were kind of just talking about coming out to Craig. Um,
Yeah.
is that what kind of drove you towards Craig Hospital? Were you looking for more opportunities to do that?
We were looking to move to Colorado. And I had I knew I wanted to work at Craig because it was a model system, and I was with model systems before at U of M. And then it was really just coincidence that the only job they had was assistive technology. So um, that was just like luck of the draw, but I also was interested in it. So it was a really good time to specialize clinically. I'd been in practice for like 7 years. So that's kind of how it happened. I wasn't looking for it. It just, I had the right skills and interests so that when the opportunity presented itself, I knew what to do with it.
And I have another follow-up question because that was interesting to me. Was the
Yeah.
position for assistive technology for an OT, or was it multidisciplinary for like speech or I mean, even people like there a lot of rehab people
Yeah.
can do that. So I'm curious if it was labeled as just assistive technology or OT.
Yeah. So it was just an interesting thing. The way that Craig structures their assistive technology program is that it was started by OTs, and so is mostly staffed by OTs. And so it was an OT position specifically for AT. We have now 3 speech therapists on staff that do AAC. And then we also have 2 rehab engineers in-house who kind of work out of their own department that we collaborate with.
So, did you have any advanced training prior to utilizing gaming in your interventions?
Oh God. I graduated OT school back in 2007, and I'm fairly sure we had some exposure to assistive technology, but just a really high level. This is kind of what it is, and it's so different because it's so, one of those things that changes faster than the research can keep up with it, I think. So I didn't have prior advanced training. This specific position, the way they structured it was they expected that and knew they were going to train me for the job. So all of that training came once I got to Craig. Now I got the job because I had experience treating the diagnosis groups that they worked with. So I guess you could say I had advanced training in working with spinal cord injury and brain injury, and that I've been practicing in that area for 7 years before I came to Craig.
And then how do you determine the type of gaming system that you use? Like, are some more adaptable than others?
Yeah, so, and that's changed a lot, but I still keep it really client-centered in terms of my approach, very OT as we are. When I'm first thinking about setups for people who want to use it for adaptations, who want to go home with it, I start with being concerned with what they already have. What system do they own? Are they playing on a computer? Do they have a PlayStation? And then I try to find a solution that works for that system. Especially since, disability is so expensive anyway, like let's not buy a new system just because of it. If that isn't working out, which really is rare, or if in learning about the different accessibility features of different systems, patients decide they want to go a different way, then we'll shift. Of the gaming systems out there, Xbox is the most adaptable. So, if and when we can do Xbox, if it works out, or if they decide to shift, that's usually what they go to.
And I know you mentioned spinal cord injuries, but I had a question for if you found that there were certain systems or games that were more appropriate for certain diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of look at the games as almost from an activity analysis perspective, which sounds incredibly nerdy, but I want to know what the controller demands are of a game, like how many buttons and joysticks do they need? And then I can grade that based on what a person's abilities are. So I tell a lot of gamers initially that because everybody likes to play Call of Duty, everybody likes to play Fortnite, and after a catastrophic injury, those are not the best games to start with because they're so complex. So I frame it that way. I say, okay, I know you love these games and we're working towards those games, but we may have to work up to that, right? So we may start with a game where it's just one joystick and one button and then build out from there as they gain capacity.
How did you become so familiar with gaming? Because like for me, like I know a lot about assistive technology, but I know zero about gaming and I have zero interest in it. So I literally would not, I feel like you have to know a lot of it, but how do you stay on top of it? And how did you even go about that?
Yeah, so that's interesting too, because I feel like I get that question a lot, like, do you play video games at home? And the short answer is not a lot. We had game systems growing up and I play games, and we certainly have something in the house, but I don't play a lot. So in terms of learning it, when I started the program, we used some grant funding. And so part of that was hours to just learn. And so I learned pretty quickly. I knew some basics of games, like I knew how to play Mario Kart probably and some other stuff. But I just started trying to think about it like it's impossible to learn every game. Like it's just impossible, right? There's just too many. And so I started thinking about, okay, what kinds of games do people play? Okay, there's first person shooters. What's typically involved in that? What could I expect? Like trying to put them in general buckets versus like a RPG or an open world game. I did a lot of Googling. I did a lot of internet research. I talked to patients a lot in the beginning. People, especially that's an area or an ADL that people really enjoy. And so they like talking about it. And so that was another avenue. I tried to set up different ways to get information like efficiently. So I looked at what are the charities out there that do adaptive gaming and what resources do they have? Well, it turns out Special Effect is a great charity. They have a lot of YouTube videos about different games and what's required. Or Googling, how do you play such and such a game? Turns out you can usually find some basic controller schemes that way. So they weren't traditional, like continuing education resources, but you just had to get innovative.
So if somebody wanted to pursue your career, what advice would you give them?
I would say, I think like with any specialty area of practice, before you go in it, it's good to have a great foundation as being just a general OT. Because I really do just use those skills in a different setting. Like I'm really just falling back on what's important to the patient, what's required, what do they have, and how am I matching the device or the technology to their abilities. So I think that's a great start. And then specific to assistive technology and gaming, connecting with a mentor, looking into some of the assistive technology organizations, going to conferences is a great way to start and see what's out there. That's been the nice thing about AFTA doing technology track, is you can kind of see what's involved before you apply for a job. And then most importantly, just be willing to be doing a lot of research and learning about things constantly and trying to think about how you might use them as an OT or how they might work. Because, when the Google Home or Amazon Echo came out, we didn't, it wasn't for disability, but it turns out it has great applications. So having that creativity, I think, is helpful.
Awesome. And what are some of the challenges that you face in developing adaptive controllers and equipment? And what are some strategies that you use to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I think a couple off the top of my head. I mean, funding, money, that's hard. These things are expensive. And again, our patients a lot of times are new to their injury and are no longer working or have other financial demands. So things that we looked at right out of the gate were like what charities or options were out there to support them, so looking into nonprofits that are available, talking to patients about doing Kickstarters or things like that. And then our hospital actually eventually, again, we're fortunate because we have these resources. We have a foundation that we were able to do some independent fundraising to create our own grant for patients to buy this equipment if they need it. So that's a big challenge, and those are things that we've done. And then the other challenge is just, I think with my population, 99% of the time they were able-bodied and doing everything one way, and then something happened and they had to change how they do everything. And so coping and adjustment, I think, is a huge challenge for people. We offer this program to our inpatients and our outpatients. I think our inpatients participate a lot, but also I had a guy today, are still kind of not mentally ready to accept the amount of accommodations they might need, and they want to wait. They want to see if they get their hands back, or they want to see if things change, because they have that perception of how they used to do it. I think that's a different animal than when you're working with like the pediatric population that is born with a disability and has lived their whole life with that disability. Not that there aren't significant challenges there, but it's just a different approach in terms of willingness to embrace different things. Yeah. And sometimes that just takes time in terms of what we do. I mean, sometimes I can show people the resources. I always try to educate them and tell them that we're always here if they decide to go that way. Because sometimes they're not ready.
Do you guys ever have issues with like getting approval or being able to use that as an intervention? Like when you're looking at the medical model, you don't ideally think of gaming as an option, as billable service or something.
Yeah, so there's probably two different approaches that I use. Practicing in assistive technology, a lot of the things that we're doing, we might be billing under the CRT code, the Complex Rehab Technology billing code. So we can get away with it. Sometimes also you can bill it as an ADL, it doesn't feel like maybe how we always do, but you can. Mm-hmm. And it's just about how you're setting goals and measuring progress there, right? It's, we're not just playing games for fun, right? So it's being really good in your documentation. And then when I do use gaming as therapy, right? So when I'm looking at it as assistive technology, I'm trying to make it easier for them to access, but there are times when I'm setting things up specifically to challenge a certain skill, whether it's balance or active range of motion or endurance or whatever. And again, then from a billing perspective, I mean, I'm billing for that intervention, right? So if I'm working on a neuromuscular reeducation technique, but I happen to be using video games, I'm using that code, or therapeutic exercise, I'm using that code. So again, I think that's where it goes back to the importance of knowing why you're doing what you're doing and why it's therapeutic so that you can justify the billing. I personally have never had an issue with reimbursement with inpatients or outpatients, actually. Yeah.
And I know you have a really supportive facility that's about doing this. Right. And that was kind of one of the reasons I brought up that question, is if somebody wanted to approach this of, well, how do you bill for that and all those questions, somebody could answer.
Yeah. I answer that question like all the time. How do you do that? Yeah.
So could you walk us through a typical evaluation process, and like, is there a typical assessment that you use to evaluate your students?
Yeah, so I actually just got done. I had a capstone student who did this huge lit review of AT assessments, and we still don't have a good standardized one that we're using, but we're looking at it because we know it's important. Some of the biggest, I mean, what the literature has shown us so far is some of the biggest outcome measures used are quality of life related, right? And then just in terms of participation, how they couldn't do this before, they can do this now. So short answer, no. I'd love a good assessment. I don't have a good assessment yet. In terms of my evaluation process, again, it's very, I could probably almost do, and we've talked about doing like a modified COPM because it is largely interview based in terms of, what activities did you engage in before that involved technology? What do you want to do now? How satisfied are you with how you can do it? What challenges are you experiencing? Especially for our inpatients, because the gaming kind of falls into the general assistive technology bucket. So our initial assessment might ask about all those areas, and then subsequent sessions, we might hone in on specific ones, specific goals. We do these outpatient assessments where our former patients come back once a year for like a 2-week, we'll call it evaluation and tune-up. And I do offer gaming to those patients, and those are a little more focused because they're coming in having identified that goal. And so then again, a lot of times I'm just doing a really good occupational profile on what they used before, how they accessed it, what they have, and then assessing their physical abilities, or with brain injury patients, it might be vision or cognitive limitations, and then kind of setting them up for success after that.
And then are there any continuing education courses that you would recommend for somebody that would want to go into this type of practice?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think AOTA has done a better job of having assistive technology focused courses at their conference, which I think is great because it's infusing OT and AT. Other organizations that do conferences that we've attended and have liked in the past would include RESNA, so that's the Rehab Engineering Society of North America, and ATIA. And so ATIA is an industry conference, so it's all the assistive technology vendors do a conference. And so that's also really good. I think those are all pretty commonly known in the assistive technology kind of world as courses people go to. CSUN, I think, is another one that's in California. I've not been to, but I know people have said good things about it. I also have started, I went last year and it's virtual this year, but there is an International Video Game Developers Association, and they have an accessibility like special interest section. And they do a conference every year, and it's all about game accessibility. And you don't get CEUs for it. It's put on by folks in the game industry. And it's just a great place to learn about when they're developing games, how they are looking at accessibility, what's out there, what features they have, and kind of how they view it. So that's been a cool one. This year it's free, and it's online. So I'm looking forward to that.
How do patients get referred to you?
Yeah, so our inpatient process, like I said, our hospital only treats brain injuries or spinal cord injury patients. And OTs and speech therapists primarily refer to us as a specialty clinic for inpatients. So, there are certain diagnoses and groups where they just know to refer. Some of the quadriplegic folks, we get them all. And so it's just an internal referral. In terms of outpatients, that's a little bit different. Again, our hospital they've changed that. If they've come through as an outpatient, then they're eligible for my service. But again, they have to have those two diagnoses, or one of those two. For that annual reassessment process for our former patients, we actually will call them and kind of go over the list of services we can have or we offer and see what they're interested in. So that's one way. And then some of the outpatients that are here for other therapies, sometimes their therapists refer to us.
So that reminded me of the question. So
yeah.
I work with pediatrics, and I have a lot of students with CP that can prevent very similarly for using adaptive stuff.
Yeah.
This is specific to it, but have you heard of programs that offer what you guys are doing for that population?
For that population, the only thing I can think of is I know that the CP Foundation worked on the Xbox Adaptive Controller. So part of me is what do they do? They have to be involved somehow for that specific diagnosis. But I would also say in the United States, Able Gamers is the big gaming charity. And the way Able Gamers works is they will do an intake or an assessment. I think they do it virtually and kind of help match equipment to you and send it to you and kind of help set it up. But I don't know in terms of pediatric hospitals. I think that's going to be just kind of depending. I think that the Children's Hospital in Denver is doing gaming, but the only reason I know that is because they reached out to me for resources. It's such a small world. I don't know. Yeah. I think Children's Hospital at University of Michigan is probably doing some things, but I'm not really sure.
And then another
how much
that popped up is for your guys' team, but I guess your hospital specifically, you mentioned this SLP is doing AAC. One, do you guys collaborate with them on the AAC evals? And then two, is that also just for the same diagnosis as well?
Yeah, everything is just for those diagnoses, which, yeah. Our AAC process is actually pretty cool and has evolved a lot. If there was a question about access method, then they pull one of the assistive technology OTs on the appointment to help identify best access method. Okay. But if they already know that they can direct select, then the SLPs just roll with it. I don't have to, the beauty of that is we can divide and conquer. Like I don't have to know every AAC device out there and all the software, which is great because I don't know how to do a language profile on someone. But then it's also really nice in terms of like sometimes even if it is direct select, but they have a vision impairment, they might pull us in, right? Because they don't know, you know, they might know some of the vision accommodations, but they need a little bit more. So it's really collaborative. And then especially for folks that aren't ready for AAC, I think we have a lot of our brain injury patients that are like kind of hovering Rancho 3, maybe working towards Rancho 4, and are just working on that cause and effect relationship, which I think has a lot of parallels to like, again, the pediatric population that's just learning AAC. You have to learn what the switch does before you know how you can use it. So a lot of times those are patients that the OTs are just seeing just to train access and help them understand that relationship. And then once they're ready, we'll hand them off to the SLPs.
How did you get involved with Microsoft?
Again, kind of right time, right place. I had started the adaptive gaming program at Craig. Within the first year I was there, we got the grant. And so I was still pretty new, but I had all this time, I'd done all this research, and I actually just started presenting on things because there wasn't a lot of content out there. And so like I presented I think at ASCIP, which is like the spinal cord injury conference. We presented at, I actually did something at RESNA, which was terrifying, but really good. So we kind of were doing some education and just starting to set up some channels of collaboration and communication. And then at the same time, one of our former patients had, I think it was a friend from high school, who was working on the Microsoft controller project. Well, what became of that? He was working on it, and he had reached out to this former patient and said, hey, we're trying to make a controller for people with disabilities. You have a spinal cord injury. Can you give your input? And he had said, well, actually, no, because I'm not playing games, but you should talk to Craig Hospital because they have a gaming program, because he'd heard about it, because he'd seen some of the things we were doing. So again, I think it was because we were kind of putting ourselves out there and kind of advertising that service, and then just happened to bump into the right person. So we got email from Microsoft, and we didn't believe it at first, so we just replied, and then here we are. Yeah, we were like, really, this is Microsoft? But it really was. So yeah,
this seems like spam mail.
It totally did. If it hadn't come, like, we know this guy well. We knew this outpatient really well, so I trusted him. But yeah, those are my dogs.
And my other question for Microsoft would be, do you think that because of that experience with them, that they are open to like working on other items for accessibility, like for other programming and stuff? Because I know Apple kind of paved the way with the iPad. Like they had a lot of accessibility features, and other companies had not quite had that yet.
Yeah. The safest answer I can give you is yes. And to not disclose too much, we are still working on them with other things. They have, that's the one cool thing about the Microsoft story is that the reason they started looking at accessibility was not because Apple was doing it. It was because there's new CEO at the time, Satya Nadella, his child had CP. So it came from the top a little bit. The company went through a lot of change anyways. And then this was something that he had a passion for, which I think you find a lot in terms of accessibility, is people have a passion for something and they go after it. So yes, I do think they're still heavily involved. We've talked to Google. I know they're doing some things also. I don't know as much, but I do think that more companies are being more open to that. And I'd like to think that they're thinking more about OTs for some of that input. I always try to advocate for that because it is wonderful when they talk to people with disabilities because they're living it. But it's also great to talk to someone who can speak kind of more generally about all disabilities versus just one,
In my brain, I just envision them like hiring a position that requires an OT to be on staff to help them with accessibility and like, right?
Microsoft has an OT on staff. Yeah. They hired, she was actually a new grad. They hired her. She's been with them, I think, for 3 years. Yeah. But she had done a lot of adaptive gaming. Her dad runs a nonprofit. And so that's kind of how she got in and connected. And she's wonderful for it. And I have done a lot of education on that route because I think in terms of design and industry and stuff, a lot of times engineers are coming after it and looking at accessibility, and they have their whole model and framework and approaches to things from a design standpoint, which I think is great. But I think the OTs bring a human side to it that they don't always, you know, can always capture that, the functional side to it. So yeah, I think more OTs should work in those areas.
Be super cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Jamie?
No, that was it on our list. Is there any other questions that you had?
I don't think so.
Cool. Well, Thank you so much. This is helpful. Yeah, sorry I was late. Thanks for poking me. And I'll send you the consent form. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions too. Happy to help.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah, take care. Bye.